Some seasons arrive quietly, almost like dawn creeping over the horizon before anyone realizes the night is ending. At first, the sky only softens. The darkness does not vanish instantly, but slowly, steadily light begins touching everything it reaches. And in your life right now, something very similar is happening. Something bright is rising over your path, something that feels larger than ordinary good news or random change. It feels like revelation. It feels like the moment when truth steps forward and illusions quietly step back. You may have noticed subtle shifts already. Certain conversations feel different. Certain people respond to you differently. Situations that once seemed confusing are suddenly becoming clear in ways that are almost startling. It is as if a spotlight has been turned on in places where shadows once hid comfortably. Think of this moment as what ancient storytellers once called Apollo's light. Not as mythology, but as metaphor. A symbol for illumination, for clarity, for the sudden arrival of truth that makes disguises impossible to maintain. When light increases, masks lose their power. When light increases, pretending becomes exhausting. And here is the warning that comes with that kind of illumination: you will not need to chase anyone away. You will not need dramatic confrontations or emotional ultimatums. Instead, you will simply watch what happens when the light gets brighter. Some people will fade quietly. Some will flee the moment accountability appears. Others may flip their position, entirely revealing sides of themselves you never saw before. This is not chaos. This is revelation. In this message, you will begin recognizing the signs of authentic alignment and the signals of hidden agendas that only appear when the light grows stronger. You will understand why certain relationships shift when your clarity deepens, and how to remain grounded while the disappearing happens around you. If this message resonates with something unfolding in your life right now, take a moment to breathe and settle into the insight. And if you believe God guides the right message to the right person at the right time, consider supporting the channel by liking the video, subscribing, and sharing this message with someone who might also be stepping into their own season of clarity. Because sometimes the rising of light in one life becomes the awakening that helps many others see clearly as well. When we speak about Apollo's light in this season of your life, what we are really describing is the arrival of illumination that changes how everything appears. Illumination is not merely optimism or a temporary feeling of inspiration. It is discernment rising to a level where pretending becomes nearly impossible to maintain. When clarity increases inside your spirit, the world around you begins reflecting that clarity in surprising ways. Conversations reveal more than words. Reactions carry meaning that once slipped unnoticed. The energy within a room begins speaking as loudly as the sentences people use. In earlier seasons, you may have sensed these things faintly but struggled to interpret them. Now the signals are sharper. The patterns are easier to recognize. It is not that people suddenly changed overnight. Rather, the light within your awareness has become strong enough to expose what was always present. This is why chosen ones often trigger exposure without even trying. Your calling carries a kind of spiritual heat. Just as sunlight reveals the condition of a surface, the presence of clarity reveals the condition of motives around you. Heat tests what is real. Authentic support remains steady when the temperature rises, but insincerity begins to distort, bend, or evaporate. People who were comfortable around a version of you that felt uncertain may become uncomfortable around a version of you that sees clearly. The reason is simple. When someone carries strong discernment, hidden agendas lose the protection of ambiguity. The light removes excuses. It removes the quiet fog that once allowed certain behaviors to exist without scrutiny. And because of that, your presence itself becomes a form of testing. Not because you're judging people harshly, but because truth naturally exposes whatever stands near it. This moment in your life also marks a shift in timing. There are seasons when life feels like constant guessing. You interpret signals, you question your instincts, and you wonder whether your perceptions are accurate. Those seasons are not wasted. They build sensitivity and humility, but eventually a transition occurs. The fog that once surrounded your understanding begins dissolving. You move from confusion toward confirmation. Instead of constantly asking, "Is something wrong here?" you begin recognizing patterns with calm certainty. This shift does not come from arrogance or suspicion. It comes from alignment. When your inner life becomes anchored in truth, the external world reflects that alignment back to you. Situations that once looked complicated suddenly reveal simple explanations. People who once seemed supportive show subtle signs of competition or control. Meanwhile, others who quietly respected your growth remain steady and calm as your light increases. This is the nature of illumination. It does not force anyone to reveal themselves through confrontation. It simply creates an environment where authenticity becomes easier to see. As the light grows brighter, another phenomenon often appears that many chosen ones find both fascinating and unsettling. People begin changing around you. Sometimes the shift is subtle, other times it is dramatic. And the reason behind this change often lies in the psychology of proximity. Many people enjoy standing near potential. Potential feels exciting, promising, and safe because it is not yet fully transformed into power. When you are still developing your clarity, people would admire your possibilities without feeling threatened by them. Your potential inspired curiosity, encouragement, even enthusiasm. But when potential begins turning into visible strength, the emotional dynamics around you shift. Elevation introduces accountability. Your confidence reflects truths others may not want to examine in themselves. The same individuals who once celebrated your dreams may now feel uneasy watching those dreams solidify into reality. They were comfortable with you small because your smallness made their position feel secure. But your strength introduces comparison. Your growth introduces questions they may not be ready to answer. And so the light reveals a subtle divide between those who truly celebrate your rise and those who secretly preferred your uncertainty. This is where motives begin showing themselves in ways that are difficult to ignore. Support that once sounded enthusiastic may grow quieter. Compliments that once felt sincere may carry faint traces of competition. Someone who once seemed close may begin steering conversations in directions that subtly limit your confidence. Control attempts can appear disguised as concern. Advice may suddenly emphasize caution in moments when courage would normally be encouraged. None of these shifts need to involve direct hostility. In fact, they often appear through quiet emotional signals rather than obvious statements. But the increasing light in your life allows you to recognize the difference between alignment and discomfort. Real alignment celebrates your strength because it understands that your elevation does not diminish anyone else's value. Misalignment, however, experiences your growth as pressure, and pressure eventually forces hidden attitudes into the open. As this illumination continues shaping your season, you may notice that some people begin disappearing from your immediate circle. This disappearing does not always happen in the same way. Sometimes it occurs gently, almost peacefully, through what can be called natural drifting. In these situations, there is no dramatic conflict, no accusations or confrontations. Paths simply begin diverging. Conversations grow less frequent. Priorities change. The emotional closeness that once existed gradually transforms into polite distance. While this can feel bittersweet, it is often the healthiest form of separation because it reflects simple misalignment rather than hostility. People move toward environments where their values, interests, and energies resonate more comfortably. In these cases, the light did not expose betrayal or manipulation. It simply clarified that two journeys were meant to unfold in different directions. There is wisdom in allowing such distance to happen without resistance. Not every departure carries a hidden agenda. Sometimes life simply reorganizes itself around deeper alignment. However, another form of disappearance can feel much more abrupt. This is the sudden vanishing that occurs when someone realizes the growing light around you makes their behavior accountable. When clarity increases, subtle manipulation becomes harder to maintain. Conversations that once operated in ambiguity now reveal inconsistencies. Questions arise that were previously avoided. In response, some individuals choose avoidance rather than adjustment. They may withdraw unexpectedly, stop responding to communication, or shift their attitude with surprising coldness. The relationship that once seemed warm suddenly feels distant and confusing. For the chosen one experiencing this shift, the instinct may be to chase understanding, to ask what happened, or attempt to repair the connection. But often the vanishing itself provides the explanation. When light introduces accountability, those unwilling to face it sometimes choose distance rather than honesty. Their disappearance is not your failure, it is their response to exposure. There is also a third form of exit that appears louder and more dramatic. In this case, the person leaving does not fade quietly or disappear silently. Instead, they perform their departure in ways designed to influence how others perceive you. They may speak critically about you, question your motives, or suggest that your growth has made you arrogant or distant. This performative exit often attempts to damage your reputation on the way out, creating a narrative that protects their own image, while explaining why they could no longer remain close to you. While this experience can feel painful, it also reveals something crucial. When someone chooses to leave loudly while attacking your character, they are often attempting to escape the light by shifting attention away from themselves. The narrative they create may temporarily influence certain listeners, but truth has a way of outlasting temporary stories. In time, people observe patterns. They notice consistency in your actions and inconsistency in accusations. And the light that triggered the exit continues shining regardless of the noise surrounding it. One of the clearest signs that this illumination is actively exposing the real ones around you appears in the way conversations begin feeling different. Words that once sounded convincing may suddenly feel hollow. Half-truths that once slipped past your awareness now register instantly. You sense what remains unsaid in a room as clearly as what is spoken aloud. This heightened sensitivity is not paranoia. It is discernment refining itself. The mind and spirit begin recognizing subtle signals of authenticity and tension that were previously hidden beneath politeness. You may notice pauses in someone's voice that reveal hesitation. You may feel a quiet resistance behind compliments that once seemed supportive. These signals do not require confrontation to be understood. They simply become information that helps you navigate relationships more wisely. Patterns also become far more obvious during this stage. Inconsistent energy reveals itself through repeated experiences rather than isolated incidents. Someone who offers encouragement only when your success remains small begins showing selective support. Hidden jealousy becomes visible through subtle comparisons or backhanded remarks. Even sabotage can appear in delicate ways, such as withholding opportunities, spreading incomplete information, or quietly undermining your credibility. In earlier seasons, you might have questioned whether these patterns were real. Now they become unmistakable because the light has removed the fog that once obscured them. Perhaps the most peaceful sign that exposure is happening comes from the inner shift you feel when you stop forcing connections that no longer align with your spirit. Instead of anxiety or guilt, a surprising calm begins settling inside you. Situations that once created emotional turbulence suddenly feel quiet when you release them. Repeated coincidences begin confirming your intuition. you encounter messages, conversations, or circumstances that reinforce the same realization again and again. It becomes clear that something larger than coincidence is guiding this unfolding clarity. When that peace appears, it signals that God has begun removing the fog that once clouded your judgment. You're no longer guessing about what belongs in your life. You're seeing it clearly in the light. And once that light rises fully, it becomes impossible for anything built on illusion to remain comfortably in its presence. As the light in your season continues intensifying, something fascinating begins happening that reveals just how fragile certain behaviors really were. The masks people wear in comfortable shadows rarely survive a strong spotlight. When everything around you felt uncertain or foggy, those masks functioned well. Image carried more weight than substance, and words could substitute for accountability. But illumination changes the environment. Under bright truth, performance begins cracking. One of the first masks that struggles under this kind of light is image-first spirituality. These are individuals who know the language of wisdom, the tone of compassion, the posture of humility. They can quote principles about grace, unity, patience, and peace with remarkable fluency. Yet when accountability appears, when real responsibility enters the conversation, resistance quietly emerges. They welcome spiritual language but avoid spiritual honesty. They enjoy appearing supportive but struggle when that support requires genuine self-examination. In earlier seasons, this contradiction may have been difficult to notice because the words sounded correct and the attitude appeared gentle. But in brighter light, the difference between language and character becomes impossible to ignore. Authentic spirituality deepens under scrutiny. Performative spirituality retreats from it. And the chosen one begins noticing how quickly certain people change their tone when the conversation shifts from appearance to accountability. Another behavior that fails under illumination is what looks like support but secretly carries strings attached. In the beginning, these gestures may have appeared generous. Someone offered help, guidance connections, or emotional encouragement. Their assistance seemed sincere, even comforting. But as your clarity grows, you start recognizing the subtle conditions that accompanied that help. The advice expected compliance. The generosity created obligation. The encouragement quietly positioned them as the authority over your direction. Instead of empowering your independence, the support slowly created a structure of influence. When you begin stepping outside that structure, when you make decisions without consulting them, or move forward without their approval, the reaction reveals the truth behind the kindness. What once felt like support suddenly carries hints of controlled disappointment or guilt. That is the moment when the mask slips. Real support celebrates your autonomy because it wants to see you flourish. Conditional support, however, quietly demands ownership over your progress. Under the spotlight of truth, those conditions become visible. There is also a behavior that appears especially confusing until illumination exposes it fully. Friendly competition can exist in healthy ways when two people inspire each other to grow, but sometimes that competition hides resentment behind smiles. In public settings, the person applauds your achievements, compliments your progress, and encourages others to recognize your gifts. Yet privately, the energy shifts. Your success becomes uncomfortable. Conversations carry subtle comparisons. Compliments arrive with faint undertones of rivalry. You may notice that your victories receive polite acknowledgement, but not genuine celebration. At first, this dynamic can feel disorienting because the public behavior appears supportive. But the spotlight reveals what the private moments contain. Real joy for another person's growth remains consistent, whether the audience is large or non-existent. When applause fades, the true emotion behind the support becomes clear. If admiration turns into quiet irritation when no one else is watching, the light has exposed the difference between encouragement and competition. Comfort policing also begins collapsing when the spotlight intensifies. Some individuals are comfortable with you only when you remain quiet, agreeable, and easy to manage. They appreciate your presence when it requires no adjustment from them. But the moment you express clarity, establish a boundary, or step into visible confidence, their comfort disappears. The issue is not your behavior, but the change in power dynamics your clarity introduces. Your voice interrupts patterns that once benefited them. Your independence removes the convenience of influence. And so their support begins shrinking to match the version of you that once felt predictable. Illumination reveals this pattern unmistakably. People who truly value you do not require you to shrink in order to stay close. They respect the fullness of who you are becoming. Those who preferred the smaller version of you begin resisting the expansion. And in the bright light of this season, that resistance can no longer hide beneath polite smiles. One of the most striking tests that appears during this season of illumination involves something surprisingly simple: a single boundary. Boundaries often reveal more truth about relationships than years of friendly conversation ever could. When you say yes to everything, when access remains unlimited and expectations remain unchallenged, most dynamics appear peaceful. But the moment you introduce one clear no, the entire emotional structure around you reveals itself. The boundary test is not about rejecting people. It is about discovering whether someone loved you or simply loved the access they had to you. For some individuals, the answer appears instantly. The moment you establish a limit, their warmth cools noticeably. Messages become shorter, invitations disappear. The emotional openness they once displayed quietly withdraws. In other cases, the reaction appears through silence. Instead of addressing the boundary directly, they create distance that communicates disappointment without explanation. And sometimes the response becomes more active. Guilt trips emerge disguised as concern. They remind you of everything they have done for you, subtly suggesting that your boundary represents ingratitude. Others may attempt a more indirect approach by speaking to mutual acquaintances, sharing stories that frame you as difficult or distant. Each reaction reveals something about the nature of the connection that existed before the boundary appeared. Yet the boundary test does not only reveal misalignment, it also highlights the individuals whose loyalty does not depend on unlimited access. The real ones respond differently when you establish limits. Instead of reacting with anger or withdrawal, they adjust. They listen. They respect your decision even if they do not fully understand it at first. Their presence remains steady because their connection to you was never built on convenience or control. Boundaries do not threaten them because they value the relationship more than the privileges it once included. In fact, many of them appreciate your clarity because it brings honesty into the dynamic. Healthy relationships thrive in environments where truth can exist without fear of abandonment. When someone respects your boundary and continues showing up with consistency, the light has revealed something precious: alignment rooted in genuine care rather than conditional comfort. As the disappearing and revealing continue around you, another beautiful phenomenon begins unfolding. The real ones do not only remain visible, they become more visible than ever before. Loyalty reveals itself through quiet consistency rather than dramatic declarations. These individuals do not require you to shrink your voice or soften your convictions to stay close. They are comfortable standing beside someone whose clarity is growing. Their support does not fluctuate with public opinion or social convenience. Instead, it reflects a steady alignment with your well-being and purpose. The fruit of these connections appears in simple but powerful ways. They tell you the truth even when honesty feels uncomfortable. They celebrate your progress without comparing it to their own path. They remain present during difficult seasons rather than disappearing when life becomes complicated. And perhaps, most importantly, your presence brings them peace rather than insecurity. Authentic alignment produces calm rather than tension, because there is no hidden competition or manipulation beneath the relationship. Sometimes these loyal connections arrive from unexpected directions. As old dynamics fade, new people begin entering your environment whose energy matches the level you're stepping into. These individuals are not drawn to the version of you that once operated in uncertainty. They're drawn to the clarity you now carry. Their conversations revolve around growth rather than control. Their encouragement strengthens your direction rather than steering it. And their presence often feels surprisingly natural, as though the connection existed long before you actually met them. This is how divine alignment often works. When space opens because misaligned relationships have faded, God introduces individuals capable of walking with you into the next chapter of your journey. They do not need to manage your light because they are comfortable standing in it themselves. During this period of exposure, however, the chosen one faces a temptation that can quietly undermine the progress unfolding around them. The temptation is the urge to chase explanations. When relationships shift abruptly, or people begin telling distorted stories about you, the instinct to defend yourself can feel overwhelming. You may want to gather evidence, clarify misunderstandings, or demand closure from those who disappeared without honesty. The desire is understandable because human hearts long for fairness and clarity. Yet pursuing those explanations often leads into exhausting conversations that produce more confusion than resolution. The individuals who benefited from the old dynamic rarely welcome discussions that reveal it. They may twist your words, deny patterns, or redirect the conversation toward your tone rather than the truth itself. And before you realize it, you find yourself narrating your pain to people who are never interested in understanding it. This is where the upgrade in wisdom appears. Instead of chasing explanations, you begin allowing actions to answer the questions. The disappearing speaks for itself. The shifting behavior reveals its own story, and the light that exposed the pattern continues illuminating the truth without your constant involvement. Learning this restraint protects you from another danger as well, telling your story to the wrong audience. When someone feels misunderstood or betrayed, the natural response is to share the experience widely in hopes that others will validate it. But not every listener is equipped to handle your vulnerability responsibly. Some may misunderstand the situation further. Others may unintentionally carry your story into places where it becomes distorted. The wiser path involves sharing your experiences with a smaller circle of trusted voices who genuinely support your clarity and healing. Meanwhile, the larger audience observes something even more powerful than explanation's consistency. When your actions remain calm, honest, and focused on your purpose, people eventually recognize the difference between reaction and integrity. The unveiling happens naturally because truth leaves a trail that becomes impossible to ignore. Moving through this disappearing season without bitterness becomes one of the most important spiritual disciplines you can practice. Discernment is a gift, but it must be used carefully. If you allow it to turn into suspicion or cynicism, the very clarity that once protected you can begin isolating you unnecessarily. Keeping your heart clean means remembering that recognizing misalignment does not require hating the people involved. You simply acknowledge the pattern and choose healthier distance. Discernment becomes a shield rather than a weapon. You use it to protect your peace rather than to judge every person around you. At the same time, you remain focused on the assignment that God placed in your life. One of the enemy's most subtle strategies is convincing you to pause your purpose while you process someone else's discomfort with your growth. But your calling does not need to wait for their approval. Your work continues whether they celebrate it or criticize it. Practical wisdom helps you maintain that focus. Limiting access becomes essential when someone has already shown they cannot handle your openness responsibly. Protecting your peace means reducing unnecessary conversations that lead back into old patterns. Oversharing about your plans or emotions with individuals who previously misused that information only invites more confusion. Instead, you become more intentional with your words, sharing deeper insights only with those who've proven trustworthy. Documenting patterns privately can also help maintain clarity when memories become clouded by emotion. Writing down events allows you to see how situations actually unfolded, rather than relying on feelings that may shift over time. Yet you keep this documentation for your own understanding rather than using it as ammunition. The goal is wisdom, not revenge. As the final stage of this exposure unfolds, something remarkable begins emerging from the space that once felt empty. Divine repositioning takes place. When masks fall and misaligned relationships fade, the environment around you becomes smaller but stronger. The circle that remains contains fewer voices, yet the foundation supporting you becomes more solid than ever before. The energy around your life grows cleaner because it is no longer filtered through layers of hidden agendas. Your voice becomes clearer because you're no longer negotiating with environments that required constant self-adjustment. This repositioning may feel lonely at first because the noise of previous connections has disappeared. But beneath that quiet, you will begin sensing something powerful: stability. You're standing on ground that no longer shifts under hidden pressures. Spiritual authority often increases during this stage, because clarity replaces compromise. When you stop negotiating with misalignment, your presence carries a different weight. People recognize that your decisions are rooted in conviction rather than convenience. The peace you maintain despite misunderstanding becomes evidence of inner strength. And those who enter your life moving forward encounter a version of you that knows its value and direction with confidence. That authority does not come from ego. It comes from alignment with truth. And this is where the prophetic reality of the moment reveals itself. What is leaving your life now is not simply disappearing randomly. It is making room. Space is being created for relationships, opportunities, and environments capable of carrying your future rather than competing with it. Every mask that falls clears the path for authenticity. Every misaligned connection that fades opens space for alignment that strengthens your purpose. The light rising over your life was never meant to destroy relationships. It was meant to reveal which ones were strong enough to stand in the brightness beside you. And as that light continues rising, the future being built around you will no longer depend on shadows to survive. It will grow in full clarity, supported by people and circumstances that can walk with you openly into everything that lies ahead.